14th century if you refused to use gunpowder because you liked your bows and arrows. You didn't just lose the argument. You lost your kingdom and probably your life on the battlefield. Is Bitcoin the gunpowder of our time? In episode 250 of Bitcoin for Millennials, I'm joined by Saifedean Ammous, someone who taught me that my lens of logically looking at the world is basically what the Austrian School of Economics have been talking about for ages. It's the only framework that explains the world we're seeing, yet the smartest PhDs and Nobel laureates remain completely blind to it. By the end of our conversation, you'll understand what happens to a society when the credit we've lived on for a century evaporates and we're forced into a reality where only proof of actual work will create value, and what happens to our world after that. If you are enjoying my content, it would mean a lot to me if you could subscribe to the channel and like my video to support my journey. Thanks for your support. Now let's dive in to this episode. Saifedean Ammous, welcome to episode 250 of Bitcoin for Millennials.
Thank you for having me, Bram.
I'm super happy you're here. We finally made it. Took some time, but yeah, I have a lot of questions for you. So let's see how far we can get. I wanted to start with the gunpowder analogy because that is something that on my journey was something you taught me, and I think is a very, very relevant analogy, right? So you've compared Bitcoin adoption to the invention of gunpowder. Like if you don't use it, you become irrelevant, and probably dead in battle too. So why is Bitcoin a forced adoption rather than a voluntary one, especially for nation states? Probably for people it might be a bit different, but in this context we talk about countries.
No, I think it's the same for individuals and countries, and it's just the force of economic reality. The fundamental idea ultimately remains that all the other forms of money are going to be made at a higher percentage growth rate. They're going to be making more dollars, euros, whatever it is. There will always be more and more of it being made at a higher rate than Bitcoin. Bitcoin's supply growth rate is only about 0.8% now, and it's going to continue to go down. So we're going to be witnessing this kind of devaluation of all other forms of money compared to Bitcoin. And in the long run, it might not sound obvious initially, but and people might have trouble thinking about the small differences in percentages. So what, Bitcoin is 0.8%, the dollar is 7-8%. That's not a big difference, but it is a very, very big difference, because at 7-8%, you double the supply in about 10 years or so, whereas at 0.8%, going down to 0.4% and having every 4 years, you're going to be adding something like 3-4% supply in 10 years. So that on its own is just over 10 years, it shows you the stark picture. You double one form of money, and then you add the other one another 3-4%. Now do it another 10 years, you double the other one, so that's 4x in 20 years, and still maybe less than 10%, probably 5% in the case of Bitcoin, something like that. So the brutal reality of supply and demand just means that the value stored in the money that is increasing at a faster rate is going to be devalued at a faster rate and is going to lose value over the harder money. And then it becomes a question of whether you are smart enough to understand this and benefit from it, or if you're not, then you are just going to be the victim of it. You're going to work hard, save in a form of money that is losing value, and you won't understand why life keeps getting more and more expensive for you. You will be programmed to lash out and blame all kinds of different things, COVID and the previous president, not this president, always, it's never the one who's in power who's the responsible. It's always the other one. It's the foreigners, it's this, it's that. You'll be manipulated into thinking about all other kind of reasons for your predicament. But ultimately, your predicament is that you chose crappy money and you spend all of your life working for money. And if you don't give a little tiny bit of critical thinking about what you're using as money, then you are like a farmer who harvests everything and then leaves it on the street at the end of the day and then doesn't bother to secure it, and then it just goes away. So if you've farmed for a whole year, you worked hard, you harvested, and then you didn't care what happened to the harvest and somebody came and stole your harvest, have you really worked hard? No, none of that work is going to count unless you can figure out how to keep it. And I think it's the same thing with money. Ultimately, you just have to figure out how to save the money and keep the money. Otherwise, it doesn't matter how hard you work, how much money you earn, you're always going to be destroyed by inflation. And you might not see it in the short run, but in the long run, it will catch up with you. And most people don't like hearing this. I think it's this is one of those things that upsets people who are not Bitcoiners and makes sense to Bitcoiners. And then it's the small number of the no coiners that are ready to make the jump when they hear this. It can flick a switch in their brain, and then they switch from being no coiner to Bitcoiner, and they get it. But for the majority of people who just hear this, they don't get it. But I think it's a really powerful way of thinking about it, because for most people, we are born in the generation that has, people who are alive today, nobody has ever had this much choice in their life about things to do. You get to choose a million different kinds of shoes, clothes, cars, and so on. So we used thinking of things as being consumer choices, and ultimately, you get to make superficial choices. You choose Apple or PC or whatever. You choose Pepsi or Coca-Cola. But people don't think too much about what they're actually choosing. They don't think about the things that are really driving them. But Bitcoin is just a very stark slap in the face that says it doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter if you like if you like it to be Apple, or you like it to be Windows, or you like Coca-Cola, or you like Burger King. You have to eat this. That's why I also like to say it's not the fancy cute toy that you want. It's the bitter medicine you need. And the doctor doesn't sit and ask you what flavor of medicine you like. You just shut up and take the medicine.
What do you think is like one, let's call it glitch in the matrix, that you've seen people wake up to the fiat lie? Like what is the main thing that we should tell more people, basically? Because we can also not really blame people that they are, that their judgment is clouded, because especially in the Western world, at least for me, it always worked, right? So there wasn't really a reason for me to actually start poking these holes.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's increasingly working less and less, and people are becoming more aware of its shortfalls and limitations. But I would say, I think the most promising path to send somebody on to, in order to get them to the rabbit hole, is to just, I think, to ask the question of why should the money supply increase? Why are all these banks and central banks and economists and presidents and congressmen and parliamentarians and military generals all over the world, why do they all have very strong opinions about what needs to happen with the rate of increase in the money supply? We need to print more money for this. We shouldn't print for that. We should raise the interest rates so that we slow down the creation of money, or we should lower the interest rates so that we should increase the speed of the creation of money. And it's just taken for granted that the money supply has to increase. Nobody ever stops to ask, well, why? Why should it actually increase? And I think that is the most powerful question to ask. And I remember for me personally, it was maybe almost 20 years ago, 18 years ago, when I first came across this question and started asking it to myself, and then came across the answer of the Austrians, which is the only reason they increase the money supply is because they want to rob you. And this is not something that you would want in a money that is not made to rob you. And then everything makes sense. And I think this is the best way to go down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin, and the best way to go down the rabbit hole of Austrian economics. Because for most people, economics is just this extremely obscure, weird, esoteric thing that doesn't make any sense. They go to university and they're taught things that make no sense. And they're told to apply certain formulas, plug in a bunch of numbers, get the right answer, and you graduate. And then they leave and they don't quite understand what is it that I learned, and they don't understand what it's supposed to be the intellectual basis on which all of these answers are being arrived at, and they just ignore it, and then they keep having all of these questions about economics throughout their lives. But this is really the key question that you want to send them down, because you could go down all kinds of rabbit holes that might not necessarily bring you to the right place. So, a lot of people go down the rabbit hole thinking about inequality. Well, why is there inequality? And let's look at the data and the measurement and what happened when Reagan came in and then what happened when Bush came in or whatever. And you can get lost in all of the fiat nonsense around that question, or you could get into any kind of other things. But I think this one, and then, of course, you could find your way to important ideas by going through any question. But I think specifically the one on the money supply points you to something that is fundamentally nonsensical about the modern world and something that is not questioned. And then it offers you the explanation for it, and it offers you the explanation for why it is done in the real world. In the real world, what the real explanation is, and the explanation that is essentially the one that is the propaganda version. And then it all makes sense, and it all fits in your mind, and it all becomes clear.
If your Bitcoin doubled tomorrow, would you feel good about how it's secured right now? Most people haven't really pressure tested that, and I get it. Some people are comfortable taking full control of their own keys, but others want security without having to manage it all themselves. That's why I partnered with OnRamp, multi-institution custody where your keys are held across independent institutions in multiple jurisdictions. No single company can access, move, or lose your Bitcoin. Lloyd's of London insured, inheritance planning built in, and a team that walks you through the entire setup. They serve clients globally, whether you're in the US, Europe, or anywhere else. Book a free consultation at onrampbitcoin.com/Bram to learn more. That's onrampbitcoin.com/Bram. Most people stop too early with Bitcoin. They buy it, maybe move it to a wallet, and think they are done. But they're not. The real questions are how you're securing it, how private your setup is, and whether you're verifying your own transactions or trusting someone else. And what happens to your Bitcoin when something happens to you? This is the layer that most people ignore, and it's the most important one. That's why I've been working with the Bitcoin Way. They help you set up self-custody properly, including privacy, cybersecurity, inheritance, and even running your own node. And they do it without ever touching your Bitcoin. They're not a custodian. They're your support team. If you're serious about this like I am, go to thebitcoinway.com/Bram, that's BRAM, to book a free call. They'll walk you through your setup, personalize everything to you, and help you get a much stronger position very quickly, whether you're a beginner or more advanced. That's thebitcoinway.com/Bram.
And then you start thinking, this is why people become kind of obsessed a little bit with Austrian economics, because, wow, wait, there are all these old dead people who have been thinking about these questions for hundreds of years in ways that actually make sense. So I could actually read somebody talk about money and economics in a way that doesn't just make me fall asleep or think I'm crazy or think I'm stupid. And it can actually make sense because, when you're reading fiat economics, there's no payoff at the end. You read Keynes or you read any of these kind of major economists, and you read all of their work and you read their ideology, and then you come to understand what they think of the world. But you don't understand the world. You understand a bunch of ideology that they give you, but it doesn't help you understand the world. The point of studying Keynesian economics is just believing the Keynesian story, but it doesn't help you understand how the world actually works. So this then helps you understand how the world actually works. You're not reading it to be able to show off and say that I can understand Keynes, I read Keynes, or I read this guy or that guy. You're reading it because it helps you understand the world. And then that sends you down the Austrian rabbit hole. But then the other and perhaps even more significant rabbit hole that it might send you down is Bitcoin. Because when you think, okay, well then what would happen if we did have a fixed supply money? Yeah, it would be like Bitcoin. It would go up forever. It would just have what we call number go up technology. And that's not a bad thing. Bitcoiners get richer by using Bitcoin as money. Fiaters get poorer by using fiat as money. And that's how it's going to play out. So once you understand this, there's once you see it, there's no unseeing it. You'll never be able to look at fiat in the same way, and you'll never be able to look at Bitcoin in the same way. And I think you switch from thinking of your life as being measured in terms of dollars. I want to earn this much dollars. I want to have this much dollars in the bank account. I want to own this many dollars worth of things. And then you switch to starting to calculate it in terms of Bitcoin, because ultimately your dollars are just hot potatoes that you try to get rid of to make more dollars so that you could then exchange those dollars into Bitcoin, because the Bitcoins you could keep, and that they are going to hold on to their value because there's no central bank that's printing the Bitcoins. There's no one who's increasing the supply. It comes with built-in Keynesian resistance. It's Keynes proof. So
I love that. I love that. Yeah, no, I think this is an absolutely fantastic answer, because I think the Keynesian thinking fundamentally, I think, is built on distrust of other humans and ingenuity, and they kind of say like, well, because of said policy, right, XYZ inflation, 2%, a random number, right, we are incentivizing people to produce. But like you just illustrated, if you flip it around, if the reward actually becomes something that you would want to acquire, that's when you are motivated to actually produce in a meaningful way, I would say. And so I think this is kind of how it also flips your worldview, where you also, I think, feel in this Bitcoin standard, I think this is also why Bitcoin is hope. Like, it gives you motivation toward the future instead of higher anxiety toward the future, right? Which eventually, and I think that's more the philosophical or spiritual part, would actually make you appreciate today even more, right? Because you are focused on the future and building and having a hopeful outlook. And
Sure.
I talk to people that have like double masters in economics, and they say, well, I calculated all these units during my study, but we never discussed anything philosophically about money, right? And I think that is also the issue with people that don't have a double masters in economics. Like, how could they actually figure it out, right? So it's just a really hard and difficult narrative that has been put upon us. But we also see that with very smart people, right? PhDs, Nobel laureates, right? They also struggle a lot with Bitcoin. Today I saw a clip of Steve Keen, who's an economist. I didn't know him, but he apparently predicted the 2008 crash, and he was now predicting Bitcoin will hit zero over excessive energy use. When we have to curb energy use, Bitcoin is the first thing to go. Like, even the fact that people think it's good in 2026 that you even need to talk about curbing the energy use, right? Usage, right? For me, that's more a signal of how bad everything is going. But anyway, do you think this is an intellectual failure? Are they dishonest? Are they not smart enough? Is this kind of like sunk cost fallacy coming from this fiat institutional system? Why is it so difficult for them?
I think it's because Bitcoin is really smashing all the idols of fiat, and it has to smash them all at the same time because they are all connected to the fiat grid, if you want, just like, a power grid. Everything in fiat world that is financed by fiat, that lives because of government money printing, has to essentially be based on the prolonging of the life of fiat. So it's everything that runs on fiat has to be pro-fiat. And Bitcoin is such a vortex of everything wrong with fiat uniting together against Bitcoin, because Bitcoin, defunds everything, so it threatens the entire grid. So everybody can sort of understand why this is going to put them out of a job. And a lot of these people have jobs that, are financed by fake fiat money. They're fake fiat jobs, but they think that they are the best that they can do in their life. And, they may be right. So pushing papers and getting fake paper money for a fake job seems to be a successful business model in today's world. So a lot of these people aren't happy when you come and tell them, no, we're building a money that allows those of us who like to be productive to opt out of financing parasites like you.
You actually have to do the work.
Yeah, you're going to have to like work like all the rest of us. We're going to get rid of fiat privilege. So they don't like it. But then, of course, I think it's in this particular example, the energy hysteria is, one of these other factors where Bitcoin triggers fiaters, because I think the reason there is an energy hysteria in the first place, and I discussed this in the Fiat standard, the reason people care so much about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere supposedly somehow ending human civilization, or the reason they care about how much oil and gas that we're consuming, the reason they hysterically have worried about running out of all those things for 60 years. And, we used to worry that we were going to run out. Then we realized, no, actually, we're not going to run out. We just have too much of it. And that's going to mean that we're going to end up living in a world of pollution and dirt and destruction because we have too much of it. But the constant thing is always that we have to worry about it. Well, in the Fiat standard, I make the case, and I believe it's a strong case, and I'm biased, of course. I make the case for why this actually is a product of inflation, because I don't think it's a coincidence that in the 1970s, when inflation really took off, that was when all of this environmental hysteria was really it really exploded and became a serious thing. People didn't really worry so much about it before the 1970s. But why did it happen in the 1970s? Well, the major driver for it was that prices of things were rising. And so naturally, people assumed the price of oil and nickel and copper and uranium is going up. That must mean that we're running out of those things. So there you have the roots of the hysteria in the first place. But then I think it's a much more adaptive story, like with everything with fiat. Fiat, because it's the lifeblood of the system, it then shapes the system in a way that is optimized for acquiring more fiat. So the environmental hysteria caused by fiat then gets captured by fiat money and turned into another way of propagandizing people to ignore the inflation that is robbing them and destroying their livelihood. And so the reason that everything is more expensive is because we're running out. It's because oil is bad. It's because oil is going to destroy the environment. This is not sustainable. So we need to reduce your oil consumption, and we need you to switch to forms of energy that are essentially pre-civilized, pre-industrialized, that are dependent on the weather, wind and solar, and that are unreliable and that leave you at the mercy of nature. And they are a lot less reliable, but they're also cheaper in a sense that they are not, they do not require constant fuel input, and therefore they are less likely to make you notice the inflation. You have to fill up your gas tank in the car every week, but you don't have to refill your windmill. Now, the windmill is nowhere near as good as having 20th century hydrocarbon power that's available on 24/7, but it makes the inflation look better. So trying to get you to reduce your consumption of hydrocarbons is a way to hide the inflation. And I think this is why people are so heavily propagandized against energy consumption, because, energy is going to destroy the planet. So, stay poor so that you can be a good person. This entire idea that consuming energy is bad, people think that all of these celebrities who consume a lot of energy, it's a bad thing. They shame them for them. Of course, when those celebrities are out there shaming others for staying warm in the winter, then yeah, we should shame them for getting on their yachts or whatever. But there's nothing wrong with consuming a lot of energy. It's a good thing. This is how we survive the winter. And if you want the world to have more energy, you want us to be consuming and producing more. You want Jeff Bezos to even have a bigger boat, because if he's investing in buying a bigger boat, he's spending so much money on the boat industry that's generating more and more boats, producing more and more energy, causing energy to become more plentiful, more capital intensive and therefore cheaper and more widely available for the world. We're not going to be able to have people in poverty who don't have electricity. They're not going to get electricity without the rest of the world also increasing its energy consumption. That's the healthy way of thinking about it. But fiat has turned people to thinking of energy consumption as a bad thing, and it's all about how we try to reduce it. And we need to reduce it, we need to make less and less and less of it. And it's just a completely incoherent idea, because, you know, nobody goes around saying, my favorite example, washing machines. Nobody goes around saying, hey, you know, the washing machine is not going to take off. I don't think it'll succeed as a technology because it consumes a lot more energy than just washing with your hand. You know, just go and wash with your hands, and it's cheaper and easier, and you don't have to buy a big giant machine that takes up a lot of electricity. And yet, basically nobody in the world would say no to having a washing machine. Absolutely nobody who can have a washing machine, I think, chooses to go without one, because nobody wants to wash their own clothes with their hands because it's too time intensive. So ultimately, technology gets adopted because it saves human time, and the reason it does that almost always is through increasing the utilization of energy. The more ways we find of using energy, the more productive we become. And that's a good thing, and that's technological progress, and it has always been. And it's an absolute shame that for the past 50, 60 years we've demonized this idea, and we're reducing our energy consumption. And in the Fiat Standard, I argue that this has reversed a trend of continuous growth in per capita energy consumption that has essentially stagnated for the past 50 years or so across the globe. And that, for me, is one of the major problems that we have in the world. We're getting poorer effectively because we can't afford energy, because we can't afford capital, because all of our capital is being destroyed by inflation.
Yeah. Isn't this also because the kind of like the result of, you know, in the beginning of the introduction of fiat money? Let's take 1971 in this context. It is actually a very brilliant idea, right? If you can just create potential productivity out of nothing, and you can start spending that in a country, you can actually, grow and build a country, at least in the beginning when you're introducing it, right? But over time, the maintaining, as you're alluding to, right, like, keeps demanding more obscurity, more layers on top, right? More distractions to point people towards another cause of, you know, whatever is going downhill, in order to not understand the kind of like fundamental origin of it. And I think, you know, this goes so deep that even the people that are closer to the money printer, right, in finance, for example, with ESG, right, it's something that BlackRock came up with, and they shared that all over the world. Now they're saying ESG is dead, but for example, the biggest pension fund in my country is still full on into all the ESG stuff, right? So even in those layers, there is a I would say, well, not misunderstanding, but it's like a ideological battle or philosophical battle going on, where not everyone actually understands what they are participating in. So I'd say even at those levels, they are part of a scam that has a certain narrative, but they even they don't understand that they are subject to this obfuscation or abstraction, right? And I think it goes. You talked about diamonds being shitcoins, right? A similar example of something that is centrally organized, has a centrally controlled narrative, right, and turns out to be a scam. And maybe just a fun question for you. Do you think you need to take a little red pill before you can take the orange pill? Like, you need to accept that apparently this is going on, right? That there is a certain way of how the system works that is being kept away from you on purpose. Like, you have to accept that people lie to you before you can even imagine what a solution could be.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of truth to that. And I would say there is another way of looking at it, is that you have to take the orange pill in order to take a red pill. In other words, unless you understand the money issue, then everything else doesn't quite make sense.
For my European friends that want to buy Bitcoin with ease, check out Relay. I've been a long-time fan and happy to partner up with what I think is the best Bitcoin-only platform for Europeans. They offer a super simple, beginner-friendly app with no distractions and no shitcoins. You can do a quick one-time smash buy or set up automatic purchases when you're stacking regularly. And here's the thing that matters most. Relay is 100% self-custody. Every set you hold is yours. Your keys, your coins. If you want to get started, download the app via my link below or in the description and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, at checkout to get 10% off your fees. A huge shout out to Relay for sponsoring the show. Now let's continue.
Unless you understand that there is essentially a backdoor to the global economic system.
Yes.
There's a backdoor to everybody's economic system, where just like if there's a backdoor into your computer, I could get into your computer and see any information I want and run it in a certain way and manipulate it in a way that surprises you because you're expecting your computer to do something and then something else comes out. It's not going to make sense unless you understand that your computer has a backdoor. Unless your computer has a backdoor, you're sitting there and you're not sure and you're wondering if there's something wrong with the guy who sold you the computer or if the maintenance guy is messing with you and you're not quite sure. But then you realize, okay, there's a backdoor and this thing is being essentially weaponized against me. It's robbing me. It's taking my information. It's manipulating me in certain ways. And essentially, I mean, you see those lies in every field of life. And I think the fiat pill, understanding the problem of fiat, is essential for mental health, because the more you see those things, the more it frustrates you, because you go around, you think, we live in a world in which you need to work and then you reap the reward, and theft is wrong, people shouldn't take things from others, people shouldn't violate the property of others. And then you notice that all of the institutions that are supposed to be there to enforce this are in fact enforcing the exact opposite of it in terms of theft. And it doesn't make sense. And, you could discover this in terms of money. You could discover it in the sense of the theft of inflation. You could discover it in terms of all the lies that you see in all these bullshit fields of science and academia and media and propaganda. So a lot of, climate science is essentially a stupid pseudoscience in modern universities. Macroeconomics is a stupid pseudoscience. Modern nutrition science is just a recipe to get you sick and profitable for pharmaceutical companies and junk food companies. And, discovering one of those things, and you see these people on the internet who fall down one of these particular rabbit holes, and it can be pretty disconcerting, and it can be confusing, and it can be destructive to a person. Imagine, you're a nutrition PhD, and then in your last few years in your nutrition PhD, you realize you're just out there telling people how to eat to be sick, and that if you wanted them to be healthy, you would tell them the exact opposite of what your job requires you to tell them. That can break a person to find that out. And it breaks them the more they think about it. How is this thing still alive? How is the system still functioning? And understanding how money works, you start seeing it everywhere and start being capable of accepting that, yeah, this thing is a big giant lie. Okay, nutrition is a lie, so what else? A climate is a lie? Makes sense. I mean, it's the same university that publishes all the nutrition garbage. Clearly, their climate garbage is not going to be much different. And so you're much more capable of accepting these things because you can see the mechanism, and you realize that ultimately, in a free market where you don't have that fiat backdoor, success for any idea or any business or any avenue of human endeavor, success in that avenue in anything is going to be dependent on meeting the needs of others, being able to help others in value. So if you're going to set up a restaurant, it's only going to succeed if you're able to feed others. And if you're going to set up a bank, it's only going to succeed if it feeds others. And if you're going to set up a university, it's only going to succeed if it can help people increase their knowledge in ways that are beneficial to them, that they value, that they're willing to pay for, that they're willing to tell their friends and family to go and pay for as well. So in that world, you have to be tethered to reality. The nutrition department has to tell people how to actually stop being fat and sick. And if you don't do that, you go out of business. But in the fiat world, you don't. And that's really the powerful idea of fiat, because the success of a particular nutrition department, for instance, in any particular university, is almost entirely removed from the success of their teachings at helping the patients and clients achieve the results that they want. So if you want to work on nutrition, your job is not to go out there and help people. Your job is to secure funding. And because fiat is what funds the university, fiat is what funds academia. So fiat is not doing that for free. There are certain things that you need to do. You need to be loyal to the fiat regime, essentially. You need to repeat the fiat regime propaganda in order to get the fiat funding. And so that's why nutrition departments can continue for 70 years to tell people to eat garbage. And it just continues. And when somebody points out, hey, look, you're feeding them garbage, they're getting fat, they're getting sick, then you either have to double down on the recommendations of let's feed them more garbage, let's feed them garbage harder, or, make some inconsequential little tiny detail of maybe put some garnish on the garbage. You get to keep your job. But if you try and do something drastic, say, no, actually what we're doing is wrong and we should stop feeding them garbage, well, you're going to lose the fiat funding, and then you're going to be ostracized, you're going to be called a crank, and you're going to be called a crazy conspiracy theorist, and you're going to lose your job, and you're going to lose your wife and family, and you're going to end up on the street, and you're going to end up homeless, and it's going to drive you mad, because how is it that all these people don't understand that it's very obvious that what I'm telling them is true, and they don't get it, but they can't get, and you need to stop trying to argue with this wall of people who aren't paid to think. People are paid to just repeat their propaganda. So I think these things are just this is really, I think, the most powerful thing about Bitcoin, because it helps you understand all of those things in concert. You see why, okay, they're lying about the wars, they're lying about history, they're lying about what's happening today, they're lying about what happened yesterday, they're going to lie about what's going to happen tomorrow, they're lying about the food, they're lying about the electricity, they're lying about everything. There are certain interests that benefit from each one of these lies, and then once they get their claws onto the fiat printer and they can direct it in the ways that they want to finance the institutions that they want, then they can just build this narrative that they want to last for as long as the currency lasts. And as long as we have a dollar, we're going to have all of the fiat world bullshit.
Bitcoin was, well, the what is money question was really, for me, the opening for the rest of the rabbit hole. Because if this isn't true and everything is downstream from the money, right? If all the incentives change or possibly can change because of the quality of the money, then basically everything coming from the money can also be corrupted, right? And it's just very hard to distinguish what is real, whatever real is, right, and what is fake, and what is good, and what is bad. And I think that is what makes this time also so strange, is that at towards the end of this fiat money regime, it's just getting crazier and more chaotic, right? And there's just more fog, and it's just more and more difficult for more and more people to actually find this, what I think is the light in the darkness, which is Bitcoin, right? But then along the way, we have people, even like Christine Lagarde of the ECB, talking about Bitcoin, which I think is a huge signal. And I wanted to ask you how you judge that when you see people in those places talk about Bitcoin, because if it's irrelevant and stupid and a random tulip, Ponzi, whatever bubble, why would you even waste a breath on Bitcoin? So what do you think when these types of people in these positions talk about Bitcoin? What kind of signal is that?
I think it signals that they're essentially irrelevant. I think that's the most important thing to take from anything that they say, because nothing they say can affect Bitcoin in a real sense. The Bitcoin protocol isn't going to find the next proof of work solution faster because Lagarde said something, and it's not going to be able to, clear my transaction without a transaction fee because she said something, and it's not going to allow me to double spend anything because she or somebody like her said anything. So for me, the most powerful thing about it, and this is one of the things that really made me switch my thinking on Bitcoin when I went from being a skeptic to being a Bitcoiner, is just that it continues to operate. There's something so powerful about the fact that it's a piece of software that's generating a new block every 10 minutes, and anybody in the world can see that. You could just go and see that every 10 minutes approximately there's a new block coming out. And then on the other hand, you have fiat world, where it's stupid people get on podiums and say things, and then things happen. Trump gets on and says we're going to destroy their electricity, and then people lose electricity. And that is a different world. It's, government with fiat has destroyed people's understanding of how the world actually functions and turned it into just thinking that there has to be some big daddy who gets on a podium at some point and says something, and then we listen, and then the world changes. And so, people listen to politicians' speeches, which I think is just an insane thing to do. It's almost as crazy as having a heroin addict. You're just ruining your brain for a quick fix of dopamine. I accept that dopamine from heroin, I presume, is likely a lot better than what you get from listening to a politician. But ultimately, the key thing is that nothing that they say can actually change anything in the Bitcoin world. And so Bitcoin continues to operate even as all of these people go through all kinds of silly misunderstandings and silly statements about what Bitcoin is. They say that Bitcoin is for criminals. Doesn't matter. TikTok next block. Then they change their mind and say, well, actually, maybe it can be useful for people who are in dysfunctional currencies. What does Bitcoin do? Doesn't matter. TikTok next block, and number go up. Number keeps going up. Block number keeps going up, and these people can make whatever noises that they want. And I think it's beautiful because it's beautiful because, first of all, it allows you as a Bitcoiner not to care, because if you weren't a Bitcoiner, if you didn't have Bitcoin, you have to care about what Christine Lagarde says, and you have to care about what Jay Powell says, and what Trump says, and what all of these people say, because your entire portfolio depends on them. If Trump decides to put tariffs, then your savings are wiped out. You might have to delay retirement. So you need to follow that stuff. But with Bitcoin, you don't really have to care about what they say. You just buy your Bitcoin, and then these people become like a circus that is irrelevant to your life. If you go and watch it, it's not going to affect you in any way. You're just wasting time and money on watching it. So that's the best thing about it, that you're protected. But I think also the secondary order of it is that you start understanding that there are things that should not be up for people on podia to decide, and there needs to be a deeper understanding that more and more of the world needs to be outside of the control of these lunatics, so that it doesn't matter which kind of lunatic we get. It doesn't matter which blackmailed, demented pedophile is in charge. They can't destroy the money. That's the thing. I wouldn't care about whether it's the red or the blue demented pedophile who's in charge, as long as they don't have a money printer. The amount of damage that they can do is massively restricted. And so Bitcoin is restoring this, and it's, of course, it helps that in the late stages of fiat, they are not sending their best, but at least yeah. In the 1960s, 1950s, the early stages of the degeneration of civilization, at least the presidents looked presidential, and they could string together a few sentences without sounding like complete morons. Now they don't. The guy before this one was sniffing children on stage, and nobody said anything about it, and he didn't even know his own name at the end of his term. And this new guy is complete freaking lunatic who thinks Israeli ways of doing war are just normal. He just thinks it's normal to just go around and mass murder people and destroy their electricity. And you're stuck with a just continuously degrading quality of people. In fact, this is not even just not even subjective judgment. You look at the level of writing involved in presidential speeches, and you see that basically we're down to a fourth grader, whereas 100 or 150 years ago, the U.S. president would have been writing something at the level of what would be considered a graduate student today. Now we're at a retarded fourth grader, a retarded violent fourth grader who thinks it's normal to be telling people that he's going to be destroying all of their infrastructure. So I think it's great that Bitcoin offers people the chance to just opt out of listening to these lunatics, and it's a small step that continues to increase with every other person, and these people are just going to lose their power and their grip over people's minds. I think and that's an encouraging thing.
Yeah, you just made me realize that, belief in fiat money is based on words and belief in Bitcoin is based on work, right? So if you want to align with words that more than not eventually are shown to be empty, right? Or do you want to align with work? And that's why I think it's also, a spiritual thing is like, do I want to be the actor or do I want to be the subject, right? Like, do I want to watch this speech of, random another president XYZ telling me, everything is fine and I shouldn't worry? Or am I going to take upon this work of life basically upon myself and try to make something of it, right? And I think that comes back so many times that Bitcoin is really this mirror to all this nonsense, right? Like there's this absolute transparency, there's the proof of work, and Bitcoin is basically everything that fiat money is not. And the cool thing is that, it's being shown more and more and more. But I do want to say, like, it is quite slow, or at least maybe for us, right? Like in some way we figured this out, or we think we figured this out. But in my opinion, it's going slower than I thought before, or maybe that I would have wanted before, because it's becoming more and more obvious that there's only one ending for fiat. And I just wanted to know, like, how is that for you? Like, did your vision change since, writing the Bitcoin standard, or, starting to publicly share, all your thoughts? Let's say, I think that's like 8 years ago, right? Like the retail interest is less. There's more adoption as a financial asset rather than money. Like, do we need more time? What are your thoughts around this? And maybe also, how did they change for you over this time period?
Well, I think in my case, I was already pretty much a Bitcoin maximalist before Bitcoin was a thing. In other words, I was already into Austrian economics. I was already a gold bug. I already believed in hard money, and I already understood some of the problems of fiat and the ways in which it ruins the world. So in 2010, 2009, 2010, 2011, when I had not heard of Bitcoin, or I may have heard of Bitcoin in passing, when I didn't think much of Bitcoin, during those days, if you had been one of my friends, we would have been spending a lot of time talking. I would have been wasting a lot of your time talking to you about the problems of fiat, and now fiat destroys everything, and inflation and the gold standard. This is what I practiced on all of my friends during that period, and then they all started thinking I'm weird and stopped talking to me, and then I had nothing but Bitcoin. So I ended up going into Bitcoin having already had a pretty good idea about this. So when I first heard about Bitcoin, I think for most people, they think, okay, this is a new money, new payment network, new way of doing things. And then when they start looking into it, they come across the economic significance of it. Well, it's fixed in supply, which means you go down this entire rabbit hole and you understand inflation, and then you start realizing your food is poison and everything you're taught is a lie and your world is different, and you join a cult and you shave your head and you get ripped and you start lifting and you get a lot of sun, and you fix your life financially and you save in Bitcoin, and you are born again. It's a hero's journey. In my case, it was a little bit different because I was already brainwashed as part of the cult from my Austrian and gold times. And when I'd heard about Bitcoin, I immediately made the association of all of these ideas that, yeah, well, if we had a digital hard money, that would be awesome. But obviously, it's not going to work because, I'm an econ PhD, so I know I can pass judgment on things without having to read them. You have that kind of confidence that only a PhD can give you, that I don't actually need to read about Bitcoin to understand and explain to people why it won't work, right? Because I have a PhD. So for years, you just go around thinking, well, it would be neat if this thing was the digital way of having gold that governments couldn't stop, but obviously they're going to stop it and it's going to die. And so I'm not going to waste my time reading about it. And then eventually, it keeps not dying, and it keeps rising, and it keeps getting bigger, and it keeps all these Bitcoiners continue to just succeed with their Bitcoin, and they're happy about it. And at some point, you need to shut up and eat some humble pie and actually start looking into the thing. And then when I started looking into it, I realized, okay, this thing might actually survive. And then that was the moment, because, okay, well, now we can actually do those things. We don't have to keep waiting on that little turtle of gold to keep, hopefully, maybe one day performing a miracle and becoming money again. Now we have a digital thing that can fix this problem, because it rises in value. So it gives people a very big incentive to buy more and more of it, which isn't really the case with gold, because it's already very big, already very distributed. There's not much room for its growth in terms of market value.
Yeah. So practically, if we actually allow this all these technological advancements to really have the productivity gains that every technological advancement has given us, right, towards the future, especially with AI, what does well, in a deflationary world where money gains value and purchasing power over time, are there even people that want to be a debtor, basically? Like, do loans disappear as we know them? Like, how is growth fueled in a world that looks like that? Is now, especially with this with these technological advancements that are very deflationary, how do you think through that, or how do you explain that to someone?
Well, I think I have maybe one of my most controversial ideas is this idea that as money gets harder, interest rates decline, and so a terminally hard money, or if strictly scarce money, strictly fixed in supply, is eventually going to result in the elimination of interest rates. And so we'd have lending done at 0% interest between people who trust each other, but businesses would be financed by equity. This is the claim that I would claim. And I've written about this, and I've spoken about it, and I've published in several places. And I think my idea is, and first of all, this isn't saying this is something that should happen. I'm not saying the government in a Bitcoin standard need to ban credit in any way. I'm saying that the force of economic incentives that exists to shape interest rates is likely going to cause interest rates to disappear. And I say this as an Austrian, which is, it's heretic to say this as a mainstream economist, but it's also heretic to say this as an Austrian, because what distinguishes, or one of the many distinguishes, many distinctions of the Austrian school is that it offers the best explanation of interest, the economic explanation for why we have interest rates. And so to use that explanation, what I do is that I use the Austrian explanation for interest to explain why interest would actually go away. So it is quite heretic from the Austrian perspective. But in brief, the Austrian idea is that interest rates are a reflection of time preference. So time preference is the degree to which people discount the future. So if you have a high time preference, then you discount the future a lot. So therefore, you don't think about the future, so you spend all of your money. So that means you have little capital available for lending, and that means you're likely to want to borrow. Both of these things cause interest rates to rise. So if people's interest rates, if people's time preferences rise, then you would expect interest rates would also rise. People will discount the future heavily. And so if you want to incentivize me to save for the future, you need to pay me a higher interest rate. And that then causes interest rates to rise. So if we have the opposite process, which is time preference declines, then you get people saving more. That means capital becomes more abundant. That means the cost of capital declines. And so when we have economic prosperity, when we have peace, when we have economic growth, when we have stability for decades and centuries, what happens is that interest rates decline. That's good. That means that we are saving so much. Capital is abundant. Entrepreneurs are able to find financing at relatively low costs. And the low cost of financing means that businesses have a better chance of succeeding and remaining sustainable. So you want this to happen. And the Austrian explanation, I believe, is very correct. And it's a strong argument in favor of interest lending, and a strong argument against prohibition of interest rate lending, because in a sense what it is saying is that if the government says you cannot lend at interest, it's essentially like trying to mandate time preference, but you cannot mandate people's time preference. And when you ban them from borrowing and lending, you're only going to exacerbate the problems. Because if I have a time preference that is very high and requires me to get money right now, I am better off to get the money now because I might need it. You know, I need to borrow to make rent. If I don't make the payment by the end of this month, I get kicked out. So it's worth it for me to pay 5% extra next month, let's say, in order to not get kicked out. So in a sense, it's a little bit like price gouging. I think of interest rates as like price gouging. If there's a natural disaster, things become more expensive. People who have scarce resources will charge more for them. Now, you might say, well, that's not
you would say.
Right? Yeah, and you know, the supermarket, the trains and the boats or the roads are locked into the town, so we have a limited amount of water and bread and things for the next week or so until we get supplies. So people who have those things are going to want to hoard them, and people who don't have those things are going to want to pay a lot for them. So the price is going to go up. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, I mean, it's a bad thing compared to not to being able to buy it cheaply, but it's a good thing compared to not being able to buy it. Because if you try to keep the price fixed, then the first people to get into the supermarket are going to hoard all the quantities, and then they're going to leave everybody else without it. So, but then when the price rises, more people have the chance to access it. And I think the more important idea is also when the price is rising, there is a strong incentive for people to bring in more resources. So anybody who's got a car that can find its way to the town that doesn't have the disaster can go and get things and sell them at the higher price. If you're not paying him a higher price, it's not going to make sense for him to go and get it.
Exactly. Yes.
So the higher prices are the solution to the high prices because they offer a bounty to all producers to make more and more. And in a sense, you could say the same thing about interest rates. Interest rates are the solution to interest rates in that high interest rates encourage people to save more, which then brings in more capital on the market, which brings the price of savings down. But then what happens if we take this and extend it further to its logical conclusion? Now, well, one of the main ideas I posit in the Bitcoin standard, and I think one of the things that made it popular with a lot of people, is to try and draw the link between the hardness of money and the time preference. And the key idea is, and I think this is something most Bitcoiners will attest to, as soon as you're able to start saving in Bitcoin, your time preference drops. You start thinking more and more about the future. So you're more likely to save because now your savings can actually turn into increased economic valuation in the future. You're more likely to think of the long term in all kinds of different manners, not just in financial ways. So what happens now if we have the process of capital accumulation, hard money, and lowering time preference continuing to go on for decades and centuries, which was what was happening historically? If you look historically at interest rates, you see that they've largely been on a journey of decline, interrupted with a lot of disasters. When there's a big war, when there's an earthquake, when there's a plague, interest rates spike up because it's a disaster. People need money very desperately. The price of money goes up a lot. But overall, as humanity progresses, as we accumulate more capital, as we become more civilized, as we become more educated and more capable of thinking of the future, we start accumulating more capital, we lower the price of capital, interest rates decline. So by the beginning of the 20th century, interest rates were at their lowest level in history, at around 2.5% at the Bank of England, which was the lowest interest rate in the world. And then we took a civilizational detour away from civilization to the valley of fiat barbarism over the last 110, 12 years. And that caused interest rates to rise. But imagine if we'd continued, and this is the topic of my last book, The Gold Standard. Imagine if we'd continued on the journey of hard money on the gold standard for another 112 years. Where would we be today? Interest rates were already at 2.5%. Imagine more capital accumulation, more and more wealth, more productivity, people becoming more affluent, people able to think about the future more and more and more. That only means more capital accumulation and lower interest rates. Eventually, you get to the point where the interest rate that you could get on borrowing is equal to the is below the cost of storage. So if you have your money and you just keep it and you store it, you might have to pay something like 1% on that money. So at a certain point, the interest rate that you would pay, that you would receive on lending, can, at 0%, it becomes attractive. You are willing to accept a 0% nominal interest rate because getting 0% nominal interest rate is better than paying 1% on storing the money, particularly when you keep in mind that 0% nominal interest rate is actually positive in real terms, because this is hard money that is appreciating, and that was an initial starting assumption of this mental model. So if the money is appreciating, interest rates are declining, eventually interest rates at 0% becomes the inevitable the market clearing price. We have so much abundance of capital, and people are happy to just give you their capital if you're trustworthy and willing to bring it back in a year, because you save them on the cost of storing capital. And then when you want to actually invest, if you have a business where you're not just taking the capital because you're my friend and you have an emergency and I'm going to help you out, you're actually going to put it into an investment. Well, in this case, I want a share. I want to be part of the business, so I will just get equity. And here, a lot of people... Sorry, can you hear this? There's a siren in the background.
Yeah, but it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. This is the Iranian missiles flying over our head.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but it's okay. It happens every day. At this point, I think the interceptors are all gone, so low risk that they would intercept them and fall on us. They're just going to keep flying to their intended target. But anyways, so I would say, so then the financing happens through equity. That was the last thing I said about it. I'll just continue and say, and I think the key thing that people miss is that they assume that they look at a business and they see that the business was financed by credit, and they think that if credit did not exist, then that business couldn't have been financed, therefore credit is good. This is an example of not thinking in an economic way, because you're not thinking of the opportunity cost. You're thinking that this credit is just materialized and that it has created more capital goods, but in reality, a bank issuing credit is not creating more capital goods. And so the capital, the actual physical goods that we need in order to produce consumer goods, the labor that we need to put into it, these are resources that can't be increased by just generating credit. By saying, hey, let me borrow money from you, that doesn't mean that now we've got more workers in our country, so therefore I can build my business and you can build your business. If you can build the business with your money, then I can't build it because I don't have the money and I don't have the workers and the machines that you need for your business. Now, if I borrow money from a bank, that doesn't magically mean that you and I can both now have all the machines and the workers that we need.
Yes.
The number of machines and the workers is still the same. So ultimately, I think this is like the biggest trick in economics and in fiat world. All of Keynesian thinking and all of fiat thinking comes from this illusion that if you just issue more credit, if you issue more claims on money, if you increase the supply of money, you can increase the number of things for which money stands for. It's exactly as stupid as saying if we just print more tickets, we can increase the capacity of the stadium. No, the stadium fits 50,000 people and it has 50,000 tickets. Printing more tickets is not going to increase the capacity. And so this is the thing that I would say, this is an argument against fiat, and it's also an argument against credit in general. well, it's not necessarily the argument against credit, it's the argument against equity as a mode of financing, in that it doesn't matter if it's equity or credit at the end of the day. The number of resources that we have is fixed, and they can either go to my restaurant or your restaurant. And if we have more resources, we can finance both. But if we don't, then we just need a way of allocating these resources, and equity can do that job. And it's a safer way of doing it. It's a more reliable way. It's more financially robust, and it's less likely to result in negative outcomes. And it doesn't, I mean, I guess the key thing is that it does not pretend to be creating more capital, and therefore it's not going to lead to the consequences of delusion.
In a fiat money world, we think we can solve everything by just creating more units of a money. Whereas, you know, in the example you gave, stuff is just going to happen. People are just going to do things. Some people were prepared, some weren't, right? Some people by luck still have their car, others don't. And that is just the hardness of the reality at a certain point. And I feel that with fiat money, there is a way to fake that, or fake solve certain problems that in a long run are never solved. So I hope that makes it, that would be my layman reflection on
Absolutely. And I think, you know, you can take it to the extreme. The fiat mentality, I believe, is what leads us to a place where the concept of what is a woman has become such a controversial thing, because everything
you can pay to become a man, basically.
You can pay, exactly. You can just pass it by fiat. So if government can decide what is science, and if government says this is right science, this is bad science, this is good medicine, this is bad medicine, if government can just, you know, pass a law that says, hey, we can all stay home and therefore the disease will go away, if government can essentially enforce everything by fiat, people get into their idea that all you need to do in order to make something happen is just convince the right people in the right position to issue the right call, and then it happens. So you get your doctor and to perform a certain surgery, and then you go to a government office, and then the government office changes your thing on your passport. You go from F to M or M to F or whatever, and that's it. You know, you've become the new thing. And it's just, it's a mentality where everything is subject to our desires, that the world is not something that we get to, it's insanity because we don't accept that there are things in the world that are outside of our control, that we need to be accepted and lived with rather than changed. So you can't pass a law that says the sun needs to rise from the west. There are no democratic processes that will ever pass this. And I think people would be a lot happier if they realized that so much more of the world is like that. They need to just accept it. And I think the thing that Bitcoin is doing is that it's taking away the power of people in authority to be able to decree those things by fiat and put people out of their, just create a new reality that people can just pass by law. And this is what fiat ends, because we're making those people go bankrupt, so they can't continue to just shape reality as they want. And it's giving the people who hold on to reality financial rewards for doing so. This was really the bad thing, because in the fiat world, if you go along with the insanity, you get rich. And then this has been setting up generations of humans to be raised contrary to human nature for centuries and millennia, which is you need to believe in lies in order to succeed. You need to cheat, you need to lie, you need to bear false witness when they tell you this is 1 + 1 = 3. You have to go and say, yes, 1 + 1 = 3. That's how you get the degree, that's how you get the job, that's how you get the promotion, that's how you get the money. So we've had this drilled into us, this kind of delusion of fiat, the idea that you can just make everything into whatever you want by just passing a law. You know, you can bring democracy to Iran, just press a few buttons and then things blow up, and then we bring democracy to Iran. We can bring female liberation to Afghanistan. We can do all kinds of things. We can shape the entire world as we want it. And we do it because we have this insane thing called a money printer that is just a backdoor into all of reality, a backdoor to all of the economics of how the world works.
Yeah. Well, as long as people believe that it has value, right? I mean, I think there's nine or 11. I think it's 9 countries in Africa that still use this Central African franc that France produces, right? And they still believe that is the money in some way, and they're also partially probably forced, right? But I think that is kind of like an outlandish example, whereas just in the Western world, I think what people just need to realize that it's basically exactly the same, but you're steered towards that point of believing that, this is organically the best form of money that we ended up with, and therefore, don't ask questions, please. Like I think that is what also opened my eyes, just hearing people from Lebanon or whatever, just realizing that that's the exact same money system. But I'm lucky for now to have grown up in a Western country, and I never really had to experience what these people have experienced. But fundamentally, it's basically the same.
Yeah, you just got a different chamber in the Russian roulette gun, but you're taking more spins every day.
Yeah,
don't worry.
Let's talk about the Netherlands introducing, my country, a tax on unrealized gains, right? A 36% tax. And actually today I saw a inflation calculator from a big Dutch bank that calculated with, I think, 4.5% inflation, that in 2040, 200,000 euros would have lost 46% of its value. It's interesting that this is just, on a public website of a big bank. So people need to mitigate this loss of purchasing power, so they are forced to invest, i.e. take more risk, right? Create more anxiety towards this future, have an even higher time preference. And if they succeed, they're now proposing to tax that with 36%. How do you look, or how do you view these types of topics that are now actually discussed, that have horrible precedent, by the way, where they have been attempted before? Is this kind of like the final boss of fiat desperation, or how do you think about it?
Yeah, it's difficult to tell. I mean, it's the numbers just keep going up, and they talk about unrealized capital gains as well, and it's just it's fantastic. And I mean, this is a historical trend that has been noted by many historians. The old Arab historian Ibn Khaldun, I think, wrote about this hundreds of years ago. 800 years ago, I think he lived. I can't remember the exact date. But anyways, he wrote many years ago about how when a state is young and healthy and vigorous in the early stages of its rise, the government is only taking a small fraction of taxes, and it allows people to be free, and therefore people have a lot of money, and that causes growth. And he referred to it in terms of cycles. Eventually, the generations that get born into wealth lose the hardness, the asabiya, as he called it, and the work ethic, you could argue, is a part of it. So that these generations then are born with a lower work ethic, so then they start spending things down, and the government becomes more and more used to the idea that it is responsible for others, so it starts charging more and more. So it's the inevitable cycle of states and civilizations rising and falling, and then it's repeated in many civilizations, and the studies and the historians that have written about it have also done the same, have also done so from many civilizations. So Anthony Gibbons wrote about this, and Ghalib Pasha, the British general who was in charge of the Jordanian army, he also wrote a great book on this. So I think this is sadly what we're seeing in Europe, and it's striking how bad it is. And I'm a person who really loves Europe. Like, most people get obsessed with East Asia, or they go to Japan, and I like Europe. I've always been a big fan of Europe. I love traveling to Europe, and I'm very grateful for all the amazing things that Europe has given us. And it really saddens me to see Europe like this, because you can see the you can see the economic suffocation, because salaries are low, productivity is low, taxes are very high, regulations are very high, and it seems almost deliberate at certain points. And I think you look at how U.S. foreign policy has been acting up in the last couple of years, I think you start seeing, yeah, this is quite deliberate. I think there is a deep animosity in the U.S. against Europe, and I think it's helping shape these policies. It's helping shape all of the kind of policies that are, I would say, destructive to Europe. The energy policies, the destruction of Nord Stream, the crazy immigration policies that they have, the softness on crime, importing people from all over the world and releasing and not having proper criminal accountability. All of that suggests something really perverse taking place, and it is really sad. And there's, I don't have any political solutions to offer on this. I think the only thing that can be said is just an individual solution. The only thing that you can do is sort yourself out, figure out how to try and reduce your tax burden as much as you can, set up businesses abroad or set up residency abroad, and try and slug it out. It's a tough time. It's terrible. But, I guess consolation could be a lot worse. There are a lot of other worse places in the world. Mm-hmm. So maybe... And it was a lot worse for your ancestors as well. A lot of Europeans in the past had a lot of worse situations to deal with than high tax rates. So count your blessings and raise up your sleeves and get to work.
For sure. Yeah. I also think that, obviously this is called Bitcoin for millennials. I think Bitcoin is the prime tool for millennials, at least to attempt to escape what is the inevitable end of the fiat path, right? And I think that without Bitcoin, I would be less hopeful about the future. But I do want to ask you, like, what do you think is the biggest threat or risk to Bitcoin that you see today?
Well, I wrote this in the Bitcoin standard and I elaborated on it in the Fiat standard, and I would say it probably still is the biggest risk. I still don't think it's a real big risk, but it is the biggest. Just because it's the biggest doesn't mean it's big. So and this is the idea that governments go back on a gold standard. I think the most serious threat to Bitcoin would be monetary responsibility. Gold already has, what is it now, something like a $30 trillion market cap, $25 trillion market cap, something in that range. So it's already more than 10 times larger than Bitcoin in terms of liquidity. And money is a network good. It's a good whose value is proportional to the number of people who use it and to the number of people who are able to transact with you in it. So if the more liquid a money is, the more useful it is. That's why everybody wants to go to the winner. That's why money is a winner-take-all market. And that's why it's very difficult for second place to replace the first place. So if the world goes on a gold standard in the next month or so, and all of the world's governments now peg their currencies to gold, or, either you peg it to gold or you go to hyperinflation. In that world, everybody has access to money that doesn't have inflation or very low inflation. And in that world, a lot of the problems that governments are creating for people would go away, because it becomes much harder for them to centrally plan their economies and micromanage your life if they don't have their money printer available. So with that, a lot of the incentives for using Bitcoin goes away. You don't need to escape inflation, and then because you can just hold gold, and your government isn't such a horrible police state because it doesn't have a money printer anymore, and so they let you get on with your life most of the time. We go back to a model of government similar to Western Europe in the 1890s. I think that would be the most significant risk to Bitcoin, because it would reduce interest in Bitcoin, and it would reduce the desire for people to get into it, and it would likely cause people to just lose interest in it over time. Having said that, I still think that would not kill Bitcoin, because even if it does cause, say, a 1, 2, 3, 4 year bear market in Bitcoin where the price crashes, can happen, has happened before, but I think ultimately the limited supply of Bitcoin means that it's just going to go back to going up, and then people are going to want to hold more of it, and then the more they hold it, the more it goes up. It's just better money, and it's going to win. So it's going to keep appreciating eventually to overtake gold, is what I believe. But the more that governments mess up with their monetary policies and with their control over their citizens, the faster this would happen, likely, because more and more people will go to Bitcoin, and fewer people will go to gold, because gold will still not be usable as money. That's its main impediment, because governments ban you from using it as money. So if they let you use gold, if they make gold become the money, and gold already has a massive first mover advantage in liquidity, that I think could set Bitcoin back significantly, but highly unlikely to happen.
I agree. All right, 3 very short questions to wrap up. This can be single answers. What is the one thing about the next 10 years that is very obvious to you, but you think sounds insane to other people?
Bitcoin. Can't think of anything else. I mean, a lot of I believe in a lot of insane things in this world. A lot of people think I'm crazy over all kinds of things, but I think the one that is the most important and most consequential of them all is going to be Bitcoin.
All right. And when do we see you on Joe Rogan?
I don't know. Tell him.
Did he ever call? Like, you're ready? I assume you're ready.
No, but I train every day. No.
Okay, cool. All right, last one. And I ask everyone the last one. What is a core belief that you will never let go of?
Never is a big word. I've, changed my mind on a lot of things over the years. A core belief. I mean, I wouldn't say a belief that I would never let go of, because a belief is, I would say a value is something that I would not want to ever let go of. And beliefs, because, if tomorrow the sun starts to rise from the west, I'm going to have to change my belief about it. I don't think it'll happen, but, I believe things because they're true. So I find it hard to make a case for something that I know for sure will always be true, because who knows. But with values, I think, my fundamental moral value in life is the idea of non-aggression, the non-aggression principle from Murray Rothbard and the anarchists and libertarians and Austrians. And it just means that you do not initiate violence against individuals who are not initiating violence against you. You do not take the property of individuals without their consent. You do not touch the body or property of a person without their consent. I think this is something that I've believed and held and valued for a very long time. And I genuinely and honestly believe that it has made my life a lot better. It's difficult to explain this to people who don't agree with it, because they don't see how this kind of mentality can be very destructive for you. If you think that you are that you have the legitimacy to abuse other people, to take things from other people because of whatever stories you tell yourself, I think it makes you a far worse person for yourself, for your own goals. And having the maturity and the intelligence and the morality to be able to just completely disavow the concept of violating the property and the body of others makes you so much more sane, so much more capable of understanding the world, so much better at acting to influence the world in the way that you want, rather than essentially fantasizing about violence as a way of solving things.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you so much for your generosity and your time and celebrating this episode with me. I thought it was very interesting, so thanks a lot, and we'll stay in touch, and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers. You too. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, if you want to help me shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, please like this video and subscribe to stay connected. I hope to see you for our next episode. Bye.